This is a very interesting time to be Kathleen Wynne. On the one hand, your political adversaries delight in reminding you that you're the most unpopular premier in the entire country. On the other hand, the Ontario Liberals are reasonably competitive in the polls, certainly not as high as they'd like, but also hardly as out of it as the party's critics would wish. It all makes for a fascinating T-minus 9 months and 2 days until the next provincial election. And here to discuss it all is the 25th Premier of the province of Ontario, Kathleen Wynne. Good to have you back in that chair.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
Let's do a little setup just before we start here. First of all, our tradition on this program is to sort of talk mostly policy and a little bit politics, and we will follow that tradition here again tonight. Secondly, and this is more a reminder to our viewers, my job is really not to attack the Premier. My job is really to get a better understanding of why her government makes the decisions that it has made. So with that having been said, good to go?
Good to go.
Okay. I want to start with the economy/labor relations challenges that you have brought in. Mostly over the summer, there's been a lot of discussion about that, and in case people have missed the developments, let's talk about it now. Because it was only a few years ago that you decided to put a new process in place for figuring out what the minimum wage in Ontario would be, a kind of depoliticized version, so that you wouldn't have to go through the Sturm und Drang every year of what the level was going to be. And just a few years into that supposedly new permanent solution, you have decided to sort of tear that solution up and create a minimum wage that'll go to $15 by 2019. First question, why?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, when we put in place that process that tied increases to the minimum wage to the cost of living, to inflation, we didn't do a bump up. So at the time that a few years ago, when we said we were going to do this, we didn't do that sort of catch-up increase that a lot of people called on us to do, but we felt that the economy at that point really wasn't in any shape to do that. We did build into the legislation a review period, so we said after 5 years we need to review this and see if there are changes that need to be made. The situation we're in now, Steve, is that the economy is doing very well. Ontario is doing very well. We're outstripping growth across the country and G7 countries, and so this is the time that we can look and say, even though the province is doing very well, there are many, many, many people who are not sharing in that, are not feeling the benefit of that.
Tend to be minimum wage earners?
Well, they tend to be minimum wage earners. They tend to be people in different regions of the province, different sectors, but minimum wage earners, minimum wage is only part of the change that we're making. But we're making these changes now because the economy is in good shape, and we believe that if we're going to have a fair Ontario, which I think government exists to do, is to make our society, our economy as fair as possible, provide as much opportunity for everyone, then we need to recognize that there are people who are falling behind and there are people who are moving ahead very quickly, and we need to close that gap.
Did you do an economic analysis which at the end of the day told you, yes, $15 is the right amount for this time for the state of our economy?
We have had advice from many economists, and there are economists on both sides of this issue, Steve. There are reports that will say that this is exactly the right time and this is exactly what we need to do, that money, people earning $15 an hour are still not going to be wealthy people. That money goes back into the economy. That money gets spent. And there are people who will say this is not the right thing to do, that it shouldn't be done, that it should be over a longer period of time, that, all manner of other things that we should be doing.
But you've clearly sided with one side than the other.
We have. We have, because we recognize that even though $15, and there are lots of voices that will say it's not high enough, that you actually should be going higher, we believe that this is the right time to make this move.
There have been other jurisdictions that have sort of made a geographic basis for doing this. So, for example, in New York City, maybe you need $15 an hour right now because it's so expensive, but in upstate New York, maybe not. Did you consider having a sliding scale based on geography?
We looked at that, and I've looked at that at various times in my political career on various issues. It's not as expensive to live in Thunder Bay as it is to live in Toronto. I actually have never found an analysis that breaks down all the pieces, because I can tell you, someone living in Thunder Bay is paying more for some things than others. Maybe not housing, but transportation.
Food or gas.
Food,
yeah,
exactly.
For sure. Yeah.
So I actually think that this is a policy that needs to apply province-wide. And just on your point about other jurisdictions, we're competing with those jurisdictions. You know, we're actually competing with New York. We're competing with San Francisco and Seattle. And those are places that are moving there. We're competing with Alberta for talent. And Alberta's moving there by the end of 2018 to $15 an hour.
Not to be overly dramatic about this, but you know business has screamed bloody murder about this policy of yours. And I wonder whether you feel...
Some business. Not all business.
Not all business, but it's fair to say most businesses.
Well, actually, I've been traveling the province all summer. And yes, there are chambers of commerce that have rallied their members, and I get that. That's their prerogative. And they are making the case that we should delay this or we shouldn't do it. And I understand that, and I'll come back to that in a second. But I have to tell you, Steve, I have talked to many, many business people, either people who have been in business for some time or who are starting up business. I had a young couple come up to me in the park. I was with my grandkids just a couple of weeks ago, and they came up to me. They're young, relative newcomers. They're starting their own business. And they said, you know, we think what you're doing is exactly the right thing. And they said, because we've been there and we have friends and family members who have been there. And we know that people need to be able to look after themselves. So I just put that cautionary note there in terms of the screaming bloody murder, because there are many, many, many businesses who are already paying more than the minimum wage. And what I've said to them is, you know, this isn't about increasing the gap. This is about catching up. So if you're already paying more than minimum wage, that's great. That's exactly where we want everybody to be.
Do you, however, feel an obligation to businesses to cut their taxes now so that they can better adapt to this new higher cost of doing business?
So here's what I feel an obligation to do, which is what we are doing. Just to come back to that, because I am very sympathetic to business. You know, we have worked very hard in this province to support business, to invest in business, to make sure that there are funds to help businesses grow.
Some people think you've done too much. Some people think you're giving away subsidies left, right, and center to businesses that don't need it or deserve it.
So, you know, there's the conundrum, right?
Yeah.
So we've done a lot to help business grow, and that's happening. That's part of the reason that the economy is doing as well as it is. But I do feel an obligation to look at those very small businesses that are going to need help through the transition. How can we make sure that they don't go under if they've got 1, 2, 3, or 4 employees? You know, how do we make sure that we put some supports in place for them? Exactly what those supports will be, it's not clear.
Well, here's an idea, because apparently you promised to cut the corporate tax rate from 11.5% to 10% once the budget was balanced. You presented a budget that is balanced. Can we now assume that this will be in next spring's budget?
So here's the thing, Steve. Those businesses that I'm talking about, they're not going to benefit from that, because most of them are small enough, they're not really paying much tax. So we have to be careful. I want to focus on the businesses that really need help. Here's an idea that some businesses have floated with me. They're saying that when they bring in a new employee, they have to train that employee up. So if they have to expend training dollars or, you know, double up shifts or whatever, that costs them. And so they're saying, you know, is there a way to have some sort of transitional support around the training that would allow them to get through? Agricultural workers, farmers have said to me, you know, we have seasonal workers, we pay them room and board. And so can you look at the whole compensation? So we're doing that. We're looking at those things.
When do you think you'll have an answer for those folks?
Mid-September, the fall. I mean, we're looking at...
So soon?
Soon. We're looking at the small... Our minister responsible for small business, Jeff Leal, has been talking to folks around the province. So we're going to be looking at that.
I know you know these numbers, but again, for people who've been away in the summer and maybe don't, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce has really put this in the crosshairs because they don't like the fact that they're looking at 32% pay increases over 18 months. And they put the consequences thus. Sheldon, bring this graphic up if you would. They say that the new higher minimum wage will put 185,000 jobs at risk. They say women and young people will be the most vulnerable. And they say businesses will take a $23 billion hit over the next 2 years. What do you think of their numbers?
Well, as I said, Steve, there are economists who will buy into that argument, but there are also many economists who say, actually, you're not going to see a discernible change. It's not going to be that kind of impact. And in fact, when we look to other jurisdictions, we see job increase. We see actually that the economy does better because people retain their jobs longer, people stay in their jobs, people have more money to put into the economy. And fundamentally, Steve, in a province as wealthy as Ontario, if we can't allow people who are working full-time to be able to look after themselves or their kids. I mean, we've got people working at minimum wage jobs who are going to the food bank. It's just not acceptable.
Do you worry, though, that some employers will now not hire people they might otherwise have hired because the cost of hiring them just simply can't be justified?
Well, and that's where I think we need to look at, what are the supports that need to be in place, because we want businesses to grow. So small businesses that are challenged with hiring somebody new, that's where I think we have to have that discussion about training dollars. How do we support businesses as they go through this transition? We're going to bring in some proposals, and as I say, I'm very concerned that we acknowledge that. But at the same time, for me, the issue is that if we are going to have a fair province, if people are going to have an opportunity to look after themselves and their families, if we're going to treat people fairly, then we've got to make sure they can look after themselves. We've got to make sure they're earning a living wage.
Chapter 2, electricity. You obviously changed tack pretty significantly not too long ago, decided to, through a number of different mechanisms, lower the price of electricity by about 25% on average for the people in this province. So far, in your view, what's been the verdict?
So let me just step back, because it really wasn't a change in direction, because we'd already started to work to take costs out of the system. We'd put in place the Ontario Electricity Support Program that was to help people on low income. So we'd already done a number of things that...
but clearly not enough by your own judgment.
Well, but we were on that trajectory. Okay. That's the only point I'm making, is that we had already started to make changes. We renegotiated the Samsung deal, for example, and took costs out of the system. But not enough. People were still really hurting from their electricity bills across the province. So people in urban centres, people in rural centres, and so we looked at what we could do that would ease those costs. And that 23 to 28% reduction across the province is now in place. And I was just up in the north, and on top of that 25% on average, in more rural and remote areas, people are seeing up to a 40 to 50% reduction, because the distribution charges in those parts of the province were exponentially higher than in other parts of the province. Yep. So I had one guy come up to me, he's had a $200 reduction on his electricity bill. So
every month?
Yeah.
Every month?
Yeah, every month. So there are substantial reductions that people have seen, and it will make a huge difference to people's ability to look after themselves.
Has this gone away as a political issue from your plate?
Well, electricity in Ontario is always, it's going to continue to be a concern for government, because, we've got a lot going on in the province, and we're just putting together a long-term energy plan, and we're looking to what new technologies and innovation we can bring in. There are all sorts of things happening in the clean energy field, storage, for example.
Have you made the decision to redo Pickering?
That the refurbishment, that's on the books. We're doing that. Yeah.
Keeping it alive for another 20 years beyond?
Well, I think it's an extension of 4 years, actually. Oh. But Darlington, that refurbishment. Darlington,
I know you're in for $12.5 billion on Darlington. Okay.
Yeah. Because nuclear is going to continue to be part of our baseload, Steve. I mean, that is a given, and we need to make sure that we keep those plants in number one condition, obviously.
I know you have used this line often in the past, and I'm sure you feel it in the heart when you say it. You've said, I need to be able to tell my grandchildren that when it was my responsibility to make the decisions that would be significant going decades down the road, I didn't just sit idly by. I made the decisions even if they were hard and even if I had to take a hit in popularity. So here's my question. The decisions that you have made in order to make electricity more affordable for this generation, and I understand the reasons you did it. These assets exist into the future. They don't just exist today. But you do know that by making those decisions, you are saddling your grandchildren's generation with what will almost certainly be much significantly higher electricity prices down the road when they start earning and paying, et cetera, et cetera. Fair to say?
Well, it is fair to say that we're asking the next couple of generations to pay something towards these assets. It's also fair to say, Steve, and this is not a partisan comment, that government after government did not make the investments that needed to be made. And so we landed with a degraded electricity system that needed to be upgraded. You know, thousands of kilometers of line have been upgraded. We don't have brownouts and blackouts in the same way that we did. We have
or smog days.
We have clean air. We don't have smog days because we shut down the coal plants. So the legacy of previous governments was that we had a system that had to be rebuilt, and so we've done that rebuilding. So I think it is fair, and I do say that I'm comfortable saying to Olivia and Claire and Hugh that they're going to be benefiting from an asset that we've built as a generation, and it means that their mom and dad can do more things with them now, and that they'll have to pay a little bit towards those assets later. I think that's fair. And that's, in fact, probably what should have been done in the first place. We probably should have spread those costs out in the first place, but we're doing it now.
We are where we are. Hydro One, they recently bought an American electricity company called Avista. You just referenced coal. Avista owns a coal plant in the United States, and I wonder whether you had to green light that purchase.
Well, I certainly knew about it. It was a decision that was made by Hydro One. It's not something that we had decision-making authority over. But let me just say that as soon as I knew about it, I had a conversation with the officials at Hydro One. And what I know is that this plant has about a 10% interest in a coal plant, that they were interested in a progressive company in a progressive jurisdiction. And as I've said to media reporters when they've asked me, we're one of the few jurisdictions in North America that has shut down all of our coal plants. I mean, we're in a very, very unique position in terms of the rest of North America.
Did you tell them to do that?
No. But I think that we have the opportunity to be an influence in places like on companies like this. So I think this is a good thing. This is a company that has got a portfolio of pretty renewable clean energy. There's a small piece that is coal. Would it be better if there were no coal plants? Absolutely. But the fact is that there are coal plants in jurisdictions all over North America.
Sure, but and given that you're not the majority owner of Hydro One anymore, are you allowed to go to Hydro One and say to them, this is really off-brand for me, for my government, for my party, get rid of this?
No, they made a business decision, Steve, and I wouldn't do that. I mean, one of the ways in which Hydro One is going to be a better company than it was is they're going to make decisions. They know our value system. They know what we stand for in this province. And they were very clear when I went to them and said, what about this, guys? They said, here it is. It's a progressive company. It's a 10% share. And they knew exactly what the challenge would be. But I'm comfortable that, as I say, we have the opportunity as a jurisdiction that has shut our coal plants to actually be an influence. That's what I found when I was in Paris, when I went to the climate change conference. My experience of that was that jurisdictions that are pumping coal came to us and said, how did you do this? What was your experience? And so we're able to talk about that. It's one planet, Steve, and so we've got to work together to make sure that GHGs are reduced, and part of that is being an influence on that front.
Chapter 3. We're calling this chapter "Being Kathleen Wynne."
Okay, that just really sounds ominous.
Well, let's show you a graphic. This is probably your least favorite graphic of all of the graphics people show about you. The Angus Reid Institute, they love to have some fun with this public opinion polling. And they do every few months, they say, how are the premiers in this country doing? And there you are.
There I am.
Number 10 out of 10, with about as many people believing that Elvis is alive who like the job that Kathleen Wynne is doing. I'm not meaning to be a smart aleck here, but that's a low number, Premier, and you'll acknowledge that. And I want to just start with, what's it like waking up every single day knowing you're the least popular Premier in the whole country?
Well, that's not my first thought, Steve. My first thought is, what's on our agenda today? What are the things that we need to do to make sure we make good decisions? I mean, and that is honestly what I think about. I get up in the morning, I read the newspaper, I see, how the things that we're doing are being interpreted, and I get ready to go out and have my run and clear my mind, and then come in and do my job.
You think it's all fake news?
No, I don't think it's fake news. No, I am perfectly willing to accept the numbers that we see. What we also see, the other chart is that people are they're impressed with some of the things that we're doing, if not all of them. You know, I mean, people are happy that we're raising the minimum wage. People are happy that we've moved on hydro. I don't mean everybody's happy. I just mean that there are a lot of people who look at what we're doing and say, you know what, those are good things, whether they like me or not, you know? And I've said to you before, it's not a popularity contest, you know? It's not about my personal popularity. It's not why I got into politics.
I hear you, but good policy, they always say good policy is good politics. And if you think you're bringing in good policy, then presumably the numbers follow. The numbers are not following, and I'm wondering if you have any theories as to why that is.
You mean my personal numbers aren't following? You know what? That is up to you and all the pundits that you talk to.
I'm not a pundit. I just ask questions.
Yeah, well, I have to look to the people who are interpreting my behavior. I'm doing my very best every single day to make decisions that are in the best interest of this province and to make it a place that's fair and provides opportunity for everyone. That's what free tuition is about for kids going to college and university. That's what more childcare spaces is about. That's what free prescription medication is about. The province is doing well, and we want to make sure that everybody shares in that.
Just for the record, that's free prescription medication.
For kids. For kids,
those
sorry.
25 and under.
It's for 25 and under starting in January. Yeah, 0 till their 25th birthday. Yeah.
Let me throw a few theories out there. One of the theories, and I talk to a lot of people all the time because I want to get a say. I mean, you know, that number seems awfully low. I mean, maybe you don't get up every day, you know, thinking about the fact that you're the least popular premier in the country. But I imagine if and when you do think about it, you think, God, that's a low number. And I wonder if part of the explanation is we're disappointed in you because you're not who we thought you were. We thought you were going to be this very different person from all of your predecessors, and yet you've turned into being just another one of those politicians. I hear that from people. Do you think there's anything to that?
Well, again, I would have to say, well, what was it that people were looking for to start out with? What was the expectation of me as a person, as a politician, as a woman? Like, what was the expectation?
Everything, different from the previous 24.
Well, but different in what way? And I can't speak for you. I can't speak for your neighbors. I can't speak for the people in Kenora, or, you know, I don't know what people's expectations of me were. What I know is I said what I was going to do, and I have done it, you know, and I've been doing it. I said I was going to build infrastructure. We're building roads and bridges and hospitals and schools. I said we were going to act on retirement security. We've done that. I said we were going to support business. The economy's growing. So I followed through on the things that I said I was going to do.
There's always the unanticipated surprises. I mean, you're about to pretend, I'm not going to get into this because I know what you're going to say, you know, it's before the courts and I can't talk about it, but, you know, you're about to go testify in a I don't know, is it too strong to call it a corruption trial? There's whatever you want to call it. You're about to testify in a public trial that, you know, clearly was not one of the reasons why you decided to run for public life.
And I will testify, and I've been very clear about what happened in that, and we'll let that play out in the courts. But sure, I mean, I'm sure there are things that have made people feel I didn't think she was going to do that. I mean, I know, and I've said this. The the broadening the ownership of Hydro One was a hard decision for me, and that was something that
people didn't like that decision, Premier.
I understand that.
Like 80% of the people polled don't like that decision.
I understand that, Steve. I understand that. But those same people want infrastructure built. Those same people, every municipality in this province wants more roads, more bridges, even with the $190 billion over 13 years. We're in we're in the first few years of that investment. They still want to see more money for infrastructure. So I had a tough decision to make. Do I not follow through on that infrastructure build, or do I make a decision that I know is going to be tough? And I decided that the responsible thing for me to do was to build infrastructure, build assets that will be owned by the people of Ontario for years to come.
But that's interesting, owned by the people of Ontario. I think, one of the things you might have learned there is that Hydro One, which was owned by the people of Ontario, and the people kind of liked owning that.
And it's still 40%, more than 40% owned by the people of Ontario, Steve. And, you know...
You're not the decider anymore on Hydro One.
Well, fair enough, but still owned by more than 40% of the population. There's still a benefit that flows to the people of Ontario. No other entity can own more than 10%. So I get that was a challenging issue, that it was an unpopular thing for me to do. But the reality is that I did it because I had made a promise to the people of this province that we were going to build it up. And we are. There are construction jobs all over this province. There is work and infrastructure being built all over this province because of the decisions that we've made.
There's a $6 billion LRT
There
line
is.
going in just north of this studio. I know.
But
we see it every day.
It's not just, it's not just that $6 billion LRT. It's municipal transit. It is roads and bridges in Northern Ontario. I was just in Kenora, and there are 19 bridges in Kenora, and we're investing in rebuilding one of those. So there's building happening all over the province, and that's what's critical.
You know, if John Tory were here, he could have said, or he might have said, or he would have said, Premier, you could have just said yes to me, but you cut me off at the knees and turned me into a guy with short pants going up to Queen's Park begging for money.
Well, and
you know that. You know he's not happy with the tolling decision.
Well, no, but he is happy with the doubling of the gas tax, so he will actually get that. He will get all that money. We've made him whole on that, and he'll get it faster. And you know what, Steve? That tolling discussion needed to be regional. There needed to be a regional conversation. It can't just be, when we're so integrated in the GTHA, it can't just be one part of the GTHA that makes a decision like that. And I've had that conversation with John.
I know you have, and your position is perfectly defensible. I think his problem was, and I don't want to relitigate all this all over again, but you gave every indication in your first public utterances that he was going to be allowed to do this, and then you did a 180 after caucus revolting, which you're allowed to do.
Well, no, I said philosophically I'm not opposed to tolls, and we're not.
Yeah.
I mean, we're implementing high occupancy toll lanes, so I'm not opposed to tolls, but there has to be a process that includes everyone.
Okay. I want to just, this is my own genetic defect talking here, but I'm very fascinated by people who have the job you have. And, I've written a few books about this kind of stuff.
I've read some of those.
Well, I'm honored that you have. Thank you. I can't help but notice that women leaders in this country, when they often come in a blaze of glory because they're replacing some unpopular man. Mm-hmm. And they can often win their own first mandate, as you did, as Christy Clark did. But they don't get reelected. And I'm asking the question. I don't have an answer. I'm asking the question. Are there too many people in this country who don't like leadership when it is presented in a female form? What do you think?
Well, I wish and hope that weren't and isn't the case. But I think if we haven't talked at all about what's going on in the United States in our conversation, but I do think that there's some rhetoric that has been stirred up, some of it because of what's going on in the United States, that has stirred up, whether it's misogyny or division, that may actually fuel some of what you're talking about. And I can't quantify that, and I'm not going to weigh in on the impact of that on the American election. But the fact is that up until I was elected, Steve, there were no women in this job, and so people aren't used to seeing women in these positions. Mm-hmm. That's just a reality. And so maybe it's going to take a bit of time for people to get used to what it's like to have a woman in a leadership role in this country. Maybe that's the case.
I hear that, but the flip side of that argument is, well, wait a second, she was a woman when she won her first majority government, so the public didn't have a problem with her being a woman and campaigning for the job, and they rewarded her with a majority. But there's something about re-election. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you've seen it, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's Alison.
Well, when I was elected, there were 6 women who were premiers in the province.
And big provinces, too. Big provinces.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
BC, Alberta, Quebec, Ontario. Yeah, no, it was.
And you and Notley now, and is that it?
Notley and I are the last
from
two
Alberta.
Standing. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me push this even further then. Okay, there may be a female thing here. I've had I've written a couple of things on the TVO website which said, I'm asking the question, I'm not saying it, I'm asking. Premier's openly gay. Is that one reason she may also be having some difficulty with her personal popularity numbers right now? Again, it might have been something that people didn't care that much about the first time out, but now, you've made decisions, you're less popular, barnacles are sticking to the ship of state. Now you start to hear some other things. I had more emails from people coming back at me on that saying, you're onto something, don't let that go. I don't know. What do you hear?
Well, nobody says that to me. Is it a factor? Does homophobia exist? Absolutely, Steve. But but I can't let that stop me, you know? I can't let the fact that I'm a woman and women are not as likely to be reelected as men, I can't let that stop me. And remember, people said to me in the party, you can't win. When I went into the leadership, people said, you can't win because you're a lesbian. You can't be the Premier of Ontario. You won't be elected as the Premier of Ontario.
I think they said that to you when you ran for MPP of Don Valley West.
They said it to me when I was an MPP. They said it to me when I was running for the leadership. So I hear it, but I can't take it in, you know? It's like I have to say, fine, that's your opinion, and now I'm just gonna go about my business and do my job.
Let's finish up on this. This is going to sound like an odd question, but I just finished, this is how interesting my summer was. I just finished a 1,200-page book on Barack Obama, but about 1,000 pages of which is birth to becoming president. So it's not about his presidency, it's actually about his life. And the book concluded that he was obviously an historically important president because he actually cared a lot about policy, he cared about improving people's lives, he was there to do the public's business and do good. But it also concluded he actually didn't like politics very much, and he really didn't like politicians very much at all. And when I read that, I thought, I got to ask Kathleen Wynne that question. Do you like politics?
I love being able to work to solve problems. I love the opportunity to really get into the issues that affect people's lives every day. I remember when I first started canvassing in 1994, I ran for school trustee against Anne Vanstone and Linda Sparling. You might remember, I've been on the board for a very long time in Toronto. And I remember beginning the canvassing exercise and feeling like this is just the best thing in the world, to be able to go up to people and have a real conversation about an important issue without having to explain why. You know, there's no small talk here. We can just talk about what's going on in your child's life because I want to make it better. And that's still what I love about politics. No matter where I go, I go into Tim Hortons all over the province. I can walk up to a table, and whether the people like me or not, they are open to having a conversation about what's bugging them or what they're happy about, because it's like I'm a vector for that discussion. I love that, Steve.
Do you like politicians?
Some.
Only the red kind, or do you like some blue or orange as well?
No, I like some blue and orange politicians. I mean, I like people. I like people. And I like people in all their diversity, you know. I am fascinated by the points of view that I come across in politics. And I firmly believe, I mean, you talk about partisan differences. I believe that every person who sits in that legislature is there because they believe they have something to contribute. We all express it differently, and we have different life experience, but they wouldn't put themselves through the
It's a grind.
The challenge of putting your name on a sign and running for office. As my son said to me, you know, Mom, you could just apply for a job like everybody else. He said that years ago. But the reality is that there's something very special about winning people's trust and then working to live up to it. And we are flawed. We don't always do that. But that effort, I just love that.
Last question. Did you ever, and you sure got a lot of advice from a lot of different corners, including from a former finance minister of the province of Ontario on this program, to quit? Numerous people urged you to think hard about whether you really wanted to lead the party into the next election next June. Did you ever entertain that idea?
I thought responsibly and seriously about that because there were lots of people saying it to me. But in my heart, I never believed that I would leave. I believed that my work is not done and that I need to lead the party into the next election.
And you're prepared to gamble on leaving politics the way that no one wants to leave, which is, you know, to be invited by the people not to come back.
I'm always prepared to lose. I lost my first election, that one I was just talking to you about. I lost my first nomination race.
To Michael Bryant, if I remember.
To Michael Bryant.
Yeah.
So I'm always prepared to lose. But I believe that it's important if I feel and I have a team that believes that I have something to contribute to the debate and that it's important for me to run, then it's worth taking the risk. Politics is extremely important to me. It is extremely important to me that we have good government in this province and in this country. And I would say, Steve, at this moment in the history of North America, it's even more important. And it's even more important that women leaders step up and say, this is right. This is the path that we should be on. I believe that people in Ontario, I said this in my leadership speech, I don't believe that they're bigoted. I don't believe that they hold prejudice in their hearts. And so it's extremely important to me that I be a voice for that position in the next election. And that's why I'm doing it.
Premier, I suspect we will see you again in that chair in maybe May or June of next year.
There you go. Look forward to it.
We thank you for this visit tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.